Hello. I'd like to welcome all of you once again to my humble home here in Toronto, Canada. And before I begin, I'd like to thank the Iloilo Philosophical Association Incorporated, especially its president, J. Michael Cordero, for giving me this rare opportunity to be able to share my thoughts with all of you on philosophy and politics. To me, this is my sanity, so thank you very much. The title of my sharing is Exploring the Tribal Culture in the Philippine Politics. It has three parts: of philosophy and politics, then uh, politics, philosophy, and my social sciences, and then the third part is putting politics into context, and I'll just conclude it after going over all these three parts. So, to begin, before I explore with you my thoughts on philosophy and politics, I just want to say that being here in a first world nation, when almost everything, relatively, is provided for everybody, when seemingly what we cannot find in a third world country, things we aspire to have, are provided already, when life seems to be so comfortable, so convenient, many people, to be honest, have become indifferent or complacent about politics. Yes, they're crazy about political party problems, like whether you're a liberal or conservative, but that's just about it. Once campaign is over and regardless who won, except for those who really follow politics like it was a TV series, for as long as the benefits are there, for as long as comfort and convenience are there, politics awaits for another season. Back to sleep, eat, sleep, work, so on and so forth. Life here in Canada is like that. So over and over again. Politics is never a typical topic for coffee or even a bottle of beer. That's why I'm bored here. But for us to know that politics is not just an organization, not just about the persons we voted, but it is how we are as a people, manifested in how we live our lives, and take note, not what we have as a people, because what we have or can have are but products or consequences only of who we are and how we live our lives together. The indifference, this complacency, also affects the rest of our social lives. Without this consciousness that politics is about us, the people, together, it sets the groundwork for relativism and rigid individualism. When all we care about is ourselves, other than that, anything that is not directly affecting us at that present moment is shrugged away. It's so easy to say, I don't care. Worse is when people take upon themselves to absolutize this relativism, and a whole lot of issues arise from that also. But at the end of the day, even when everything is provided, when relatively life is comfortable and convenient, people here still complain, still rant about what? About not having what they want. So question is, when it comes to not having what we want, what is the difference between a first world nation and a third world nation? What is different from what United States or Canada wants from what Philippines wants? The lack of something, the lack of everything, is just universal. This goes to all social issues, I should say, because all of it is directly or indirectly a consequence of not having what we want as an individual, as a community, as a nation. So, what is this that we want forever? Aristotle clearly sets the context of politics, and that includes, of course, its function. And I'm sure I'm not the only one who will be quoting him, but to jumpstart our journey, take note journey, so that means it would take some time, let me refresh you with his words. Every state is a community of some kind, and every community is established with a view to some good. For mankind always acts in order to obtain that which they think good. But if all communities aim at some good, the state or political community, which is the highest of all, and which embraces all the rest, aims, and in greater degree than any other, at the highest good. What is this that we forever want? Good. Not only any other good, but that common good, that common highest good. And being the highest good, all other lesser goods are included in its comprehension. That is why we just can't stop needing one thing. We just want more and more. Why? Because we don't have it yet. Come to think of it, many of us just simply gave up, got contented, got tired working for this aim, the highest good. We have become contented, the lesser ones, a glimpse of, or a facet only, of the fullness of that highest good. So at this point, I'll warp forward to explore this topic with my social sciences. If you recall what we have learned in sociology and anthropology, when man just kept on discovering and inventing because they need this and that, because they want this and that, we also developed as a social organization. Aristotle actually elaborated on this in the following paragraphs of Book 1 of Politics. But it is good to note that for him, the context of politics is a group of people, a community. A state for him must first be a community who has a common aim, which is again the highest good. And because of this aim, this necessity made possible human evolution, made possible human civilization. And everything that developed, structures and processes, changes, something good I can say, and even the bad ones, are all necessary, now that we are looking back to history and are learning from it. And one of the many structures and processes that developed out of necessity was the institution to put order things. Political organizations developed. I won't go through them one by one, but social organizations, when man started to know that they can get more from being together, after basic unit or institution of social organization, which is the family, was organized as bands, then it developed to tribes or segmentary societies, which are several families or bands deciding to live together and benefit from that organization in order to get more. Then when boundaries are set in place to determine private property, from these tribes, villages develop. And as it occupied other villages, other territories, states eventually develop. And to get more and more and more, experiencing the imperialism and colonization in the process, we reach our present nation states, our current global states. I hope that in your minds you had a quick recap of the entire history of civilization, of the entire human history. And context-wise, looking at ourselves now, we still want to get more and more and more. Now again, I am trying to outline this development because along with these developments in our social organization is the development of political organizations. In fact, I should say, with political organizations, we were able as a people, as human beings, regardless of the means, to reach this far. Many societies did not make it this far. Survival of the fittest, and not by natural selection, but more so because of human choices. We survived. We are still the fittest. Why? Because we're driven towards that highest good. We sometimes confuse ourselves with the lesser good, but consciously or unconsciously, no matter how we deny it or act indifferent or complacent, we are drawn towards that aim. The more we refuse this, the more we deny, the more we become anxious and frustrated, the more our lives become meaningless. Our own contentment or despair breeds alienation, breeds anomie. Sadly, that many of us see this. This is why politics has become detached from our day-to-day life. Just an aspect, categorized only to those who are actively engaged into it. The way we understand politics, the way we do politics nowadays, is a complete contradiction to what it should be. To my mind, this also goes a long way with how we as a person and as a people philosophize, how we critically think of our lives. And as much as our lives are all driven by our aspirations for progress, to industrialize, to globalize, to be contented with comfort and convenience, contented with a lesser good. We only seek what can satisfy our wants and needs at the moment. There is no need to think further and farther. There is no need to think critically when the choices, the alternatives, are right before our eyes, ready for the picking, comfortable and convenient. At an instant, we get what we want. This dynamics cause a cultural gap between what politics is or should be and from how we perceive and do politics now. And of course, consequently, how we live our lives as a people. Culture gap is a phenomenon when material culture goes way ahead of the immaterial culture or vice versa. And because of this, we are trying to explore bringing back into our consciousness the context of politics into our lives. I would even say, with that, the context of philosophy into our lives. Why? Because philosophy is the only way to understand what politics is or should be, and how to apply it to context. And sad is the principle, empty stomachs can hardly philosophize. So what is our context as a people? I think by asking ourselves of that basic question, we can proceed with contextualizing Philippine politics. For a fact that our current structure and processes are already an evolution, or I should say, an accumulation of many foreign structures and processes, pose an issue. And so I proceed, I must qualify the difficulty to dissect or to break down these structures and processes because you know how we are when it comes to acculturation and assimilation. Our adaptability has always been proven to our advantage or not. But along with that, our cohesiveness, our strong communal identity has also allowed us to preserve the essentials of our own culture, of our very own culture. I know when I say very own culture, I mean to say pre-colonial, which is also saying the fact that we did not have a national culture yet. What we had before national or even regional culture was tribal culture. This is the eyepiece that I will use to explore Philippine politics with you today. Okay, so how can we contextualize our Philippine politics? One moment. Well, before we can get to that, we have to know first what our context is. So just a primary principle, people first before politics. Again, people first before politics. Context, and in context to what we're talking about, social context, grows from and is grounded on human interaction and relationship. So context grows from and is grounded on human interaction and relationship. Take this out of the design or formula or concept or consciousness, nothing can be constituted at all. Without human interaction and relationship, there will be no context. And of course, politics would not have been conceived at all among the many others that come out of human interaction and relationship. It is only in the secondary principle that politics have been instituted already can create context. Again, the primary principle is people first before politics. And the second principle, having politics instituted already as a political organization, politics can create context. So primary principle and secondary principle. And this context in the secondary principle is already arbitrary and conventional, meaning it is already a social construct. It's not given by the people in that community. It's a social construct already from or by the people of that community. It has been arbitrated and made conventional. As arbitrary, it means we have decided on it as a people, whoever belongs and are legitimized in that community. And made conventional, meaning we have shared, learned, and taught and passed it on from one generation to the next. Come to think of it, taking into account every single event in the past, that's the shortest summary of our human history. So, there is a primary principle and a secondary principle. Remember them? Primary principle is people first before politics, and second is politics can create context. I want you to keep these principles in mind as we proceed. Now, what is our context? I want to bring everyone to explore the fact that many of our human interactions and relationships, meaning our Filipino social contexts, are still tribal. Now, it sounds bad, but actually, this is a benefit for us, even. I should say that. We have, in fact, territorially categorized our smallest unit in society to a barangay or barrio, including purok or sitio, which is no less our concept of a village where a tribe resides. And we consider both its structures and processes. After several colonizations by great powerful nations, bringing along their own social institutions of politics and government, religion, education, and among others, this tribal way of life resiliently survived until now. As we have progressed as a nation state, as a republic, that thriving and dynamic culture, before we know there was Spain or United States or Japan, sustained us pretty much like a current, a glue, keeping us all together. And come to think of it, many of these are being challenged by the developments we have had as a people in history. This, I believe, is where we have a cultural gap. As a society, material culture rides with the tides of what is global already. And when I say material culture, again, anything that is created by human persons in their interactions and relationships, from tools to structures like governments, or what seem to be hip to talk about is technology, among the many others. And at the other pole, so material culture, at the other pole of it, our immaterial culture, our customs and traditions, our belief systems, our values remain local, remain tribal. And with this gap, there is a confusion as to how things should be done. More so, how we do politics, since politics is basically an interaction that is caught up in this gap. We do politics in a very tribal way, in a structure that is very much industrial, very much contemporary, very much globalized already. So take note of that. We do politics in a very tribal way, in a structure that is very much industrial, very much contemporary, very much globalized already. And when I say industrialized, it also includes other concepts such as capitalism, commercialism, or neocolonialism, or neo-imperialism, and the likes, and of course their effects. So pretty much convoluted with all these concepts, but they are interrelated, that in your own time, please review them. Now, take out the structures that our government has right now. So imagine the structures of government and the processes that involve there. So let's start with taking out the constitution, the branches of our government, the different cabinets, departments, and offices from the national to the local, even to the barangay level. Take out the elections, from the campaigning to the voting, all the structures that are set in place in our history. Take out all the structures set in place by the different governments that we have experienced as a people, from monarchy to democracy to a taste of militia government to dictatorship, even consider philocracy as a form of government, or even the structure of the different churches we have in the Philippines. What is left is simply that organic tribal interaction and relationships that we have as a people, passed on from one generation to the next in the quiet nooks of our family life, in our communities. And I would even say undisturbed, actually, with the whole enterprise of politics. But of course, consciously or unconsciously, influencing or moving us in the way we do politics. So it might be undisturbed, this tribal culture, but actually, at the current undercurrent of it, consciously or unconsciously, it influences also how we do things, especially in how we do politics. So the whole structure of politics, looking from the outside of our day-to-day lives, looks like a scaffolding. So take note, scaffolding, that keeps from our sight whatever is going on inside. So whatever going on inside, actually in our lives, is the human interactions and relationships that we have. Government or politics is just a scaffolding that covers it from our sight. We just need to nitpick, to take a peek and see what's going on. Who ends up our leaders, what made them and what to lead us, what is in them that made them a leader, and what made us choose them to lead us, And the tricky part, what did they do to make us choose them? Consider the criteria we have at the back of our minds of who we choose to lead us. Now, I will randomly explore some points with you considering the time given to me because I know I can go forever. And as I proceed, I want you to put into your mind the primary principle, politics first before politics, because the context of tribal communities is not the structure, but the people. And the basic unit or group or community from long, long time ago is, of course, the family. The father and the mother and the children or the child. This is the same basic unit we have until now, family. So consider the primary principle of politics before people, before politics, as that of the interaction and relationship of the father, the mother, and their children, along with the ascribed and acquired functions they have, which consequently also determines gender roles, make up the basic political unit. So take note, the following the primary principle, which is people first before politics. So what sets the context is the people. All right. So the basic unit before was family. So father, mother, and their children. So the interaction and the relationship of these people becomes the context. Okay. So again, people before politics. And so from the basic unit of social organization, as tribes are made up of families, the political structure is set in the context of the structures and processes of family too. So this is the primary principle. So in the nomadic system, automatically what sets the context is family. Then as it developed into segmentary societies or tribes, because there are a group of families, so these groups of families also sets the context, and of course it gets complicated and complex as well. So keep this in context in mind as we proceed. So let me explore now to you some of the points randomly, how we can look at our Philippine politics in the eyes of our tribal culture. Just a few of them because there's a lot of them. And hopefully this can open your eyes to venture into more exploration with the other aspects of how we do our lives every day. Okay? So leadership in tribal communities can either be patriarchal or matriarchal, a manifestation of the authority of the father or mother of a family. It started off egalitarian, especially in the band system where everything is equally distributed, even labor. So remember hunting and gathering communities? With the population increasing after people learned how to produce their own food in pastoralism and agriculture, so from an egalitarian society where everyone is equal, there was no need of a structure to put things in order yet, because it's the context. And so arbitrarily and conventionally borrowing the structures and processes of their family life, they chose leaders to put things in order. So as it became complex, okay, so they borrowed the structures and processes of family life into that context already. The social in the village system where families are gathered in one territory already. Okay, so they chose leaders to put things in order. Politics is just about putting things in order. If the family were patriarchal, the tribe adapted a patriarchal system. Matriarchal if it was matriarchal. Although, of course, I should say the most common is patriarchal by necessity. I'll clarify that point as we go on. How do they determine who to lead? Age is the first criteria. Again, age. So don't be afraid if you're growing old in the Philippine context. Here they go crazy because it does not start with age. So age is the first criteria, and so in patriarchy, the eldest male, and in matriarchy, the eldest female. Still consistent with the structure of family. Of course, consistently, mother and father is the eldest in the family structure. But as time passed, seniority was not enough. The elders assumed as wisdom comes with age, advisory roles such became the Council of Elders. They needed brave and strong leaders, and so they submitted candidates to trial by ordeal. So there are different kinds of trial and ordeal. They needed such leaders because they were at war with other villages, or why, or as their population increases, they needed leaders to lead conquests. It is no doubt why we associate these criteria consciously or unconsciously with men, with our fathers, brave and strong. The characteristic of men or fathers as breadwinner was more industrial. So take note of the changes in how we perceive fatherhood, for example. So brave and strong as opposed to breadwinner, because in fact in a tribal society, this characteristic of a breadwinner was more associated with women because they were the ones to provide. They were the ones who take care. Because usually people would go out and do hunting, for example, and then in the enterprise of politics, women were not allowed in a patriarchal society, so they're more the ones providing. So in context of Philippines has always been patriarchal. The image of the father and the characteristics we have of what a good father reflect our choices of leaders as well. Now, there's no father issues here. It's just that consciously, as a people, our idea of a good father also is reflected on our choices of leaders. Or, not the ideal one, how we perceived our experience of a father may also reflect the choices we have of our leaders. So we have this ingrained in our consciousness and thriving in our culture. For example, our padrino system, where most of our economic and political structures are grounded and have developed in history, are pretty much a manifestation of this culture. We don't need to dig Jung's prototypes to see the obvious. Nepotism and dynasties thrive because of this, and many of our leaders stayed in power because of this. Now, no wonder we cannot take this out of our system. In contrast to patriarchal societies, we have matriarchal societies developed usually in times of peace, or better yet, of prosperity. So when I said that, I'll explain further necessity. So these are the things, from a warring society to a society where there is peace already, or better yet, a prosperous society. So take note of the characteristics. Although, of course, the characteristics of bravery and strength are necessary, still, to put things in order, to impose and maintain order. But other than these two criteria, skills of women or mothers to organize comes into place. Along with that, beautification, diplomacy, and of course, more than intellect, is wisdom from intuition, or better yet, gut feeling. Now, come to think of it, this things that we characterize our mothers and fathers, which generally assumes also gender roles or gender expectations. If you bring them all together, you can see how crazy Senate and Congress is, because of course, from a patriarchal society, we see the power of women there. So you can see the colorful interaction and relationship set in place by this context of having them work together. So, bringing this into our context, notice these points in the way we perceive what a leader is, and eventually who we vote to lead us. So I won't go into the details of our manifest, meaning our prevailing choices for leaders, but unique to our experience as a nation state, we had 2 women presidents already after a long streak of brave and strong men. So you have Cory and GMA. So I'm just giving a contrast of how we were as a society before, and the changes that happened, which allowed us to be egalitarian in a way of seeing our politics. So Cory won the snap election without even considering those behind her winning or the assurance of the full support of the armed forces. The soft-spoken housewife, as she was introduced, and I must say perceived, won because she was expected to clean up the dirt of the 21 years of dictatorship. Ain't that a function of mothers? So come to think of it also, the early concept of politics, along with economics, is simply household management. So you can see how We don't think about these things. But when we look back and bring into mind theories, concepts we have long time ago, this very simple things hiding in the current of all these complications in our society, simple. Household management, because we borrowed a concept from family, which is household management, and then bring into a bigger picture, which is the nation, which is also house. So here we had somebody to clean up something. So the concept of that household management. So we need a homemaker. And from then on, she opened up our structure of government to women. And I should say to the world even. Jime, the second woman president, became president also by default as vice president after Joseph Estrada. Oh, those were beautiful times when he was impeached. She was also expected to clean up the mess of the previous regime. Other than that, I must say they both showed bravery and strength too, because they were also leaders at the most critical of times. Remember, I said I'll get back to the point of necessity. Necessity is not only on the mother of invention, it is also the ones influencing our choices. Necessity influences our choices as well. So whether we are warring or we are on peace, we have difficulties, it influences our choices, of course. I'm sure it's obvious. But before I move on right now, what seems to be our need as a nation? I mean, we have our personal lives, but our personal needs. But what is our need as a nation? So when I say what is our need as a nation, it's an accumulation of all our individual needs. So it's the way we look at it. So do we need a brave or strong leader? Do we need fathers or mothers or both? How we would want our next sets of leaders to be. So I know that it is already campaign period, so election is pretty much coming sooner than we will know, especially with all the propagandas and controversies coming from here and there. Right now when I'm doing this video lecture, it's like if you open Facebook, it's all about Manny Pacquiao now with the different perspectives. It's crazy. The debate, even the presidential debate, even is overshadowed by this. And I mean, these are all propagandas and controversies. It became as such. It started with a share of opinion, and yeah, as a people, we made it as like that. So how do we? But how do our leaders get our attention? How do they win? What do they do that makes us vote them? Simple. Their appeal. Better yet, their charisma. The controversies probably would also include here. I never included that, but somehow it helps. It opens up the minds of people and makes the retention work. So unfortunately, it's not really their family or educational background or the credentials that matter. It's not really their experience that matter, not even their performance in service. That is too much to bear in mind if you consider that normally. What matters most is appeal or charisma. For us, it's appeal or charisma, which is very dangerous also. So for all of us who vote like as if we are taking a compre exam, because we want to say that we are educated, informed in our voting, we dig these things. But for a normal tao, no, they don't do that. And that is something frustrating. But that is also a challenge for us to be able to counterattack that kind of phenomenon. So, appeal to the crowd has always been a factor of sustaining power in tribal societies. Take note of the term I use, sustaining rather than acquiring or attaining power. Why? Because acquiring or attaining power was regulated by trial or ordeal already. Once you pass all the trials, you're already in power. The next problem is how to maintain your power. So to put into context, to sustain power nowadays, politicians consciously or unconsciously use the appeal to the crowd. And they just have bags of tricks ready for their perusal. All the fallacies in logic are deliberately flaunted in securing and sustaining power. Do I need to enumerate and discuss the fallacies? I'm sure you can ask your Jaro, and he would be glad to pause this video and discuss to you the fallacies for the next 2 to 3 hours. So you can only be amazed at how they can pull such tricks to a mass of people. Question is, why do we fall for it? Along with that appeal to the crowd is the bandwagon effect. And with the rise of social media, it's so easy to reach greater number of people and create the effect to whichever appeal we fall for. The thing is, in the tribal societies, this is, again, take note of the word necessary. The appeal to the crowd and the bandwagon effect was necessary in their context. So why? Why is it necessary? Because if you fall into a losing crowd, you are also in danger of being denigrated. If not cast out to a lower case, or worse comes to worse, exiled or even put to death. But nowadays, we have structures set in place to regulate these effects. We should vote freely without fear of being not in the in crowd at all. Now, how can we make sense of these random points? I have openly uh, brought out some of the points, the points from our tribal culture. So, how do we make sense of these? So, although there are still a lot that can be discussed if time allows, as I emphasized in the first part, after Aristotle's view of a state and why there is a need for politics, we as human persons aim for the highest good. All our lives are directed to that highest good. And along the way, as we live our lives day to day, we get to have a foretaste, a facet, or a portion of that highest good, and little other lesser goods given to us. And because of that, our lives just became complex as we evolved, as we develop one structure over another, just so we can put things in order to attain it, to have the highest good. So take note of that. Now, if you compare it, in a tribal society, we have a simple structure of family life, a borrowed family life, relationship with father, mother, and children. Along with that are the functions. As we develop also, we've placed so many structures already one after the other. Remember the scaffolding? It complicates how we understand somehow the simple things of how we do our lives every day. The simple human interactions and relationships. So it makes it complicated also to understand it, and because it's complicated to understand it, how we do things is also complicated to be understood. So the primary principle, but one thing we have to keep in mind is these structures that are created by the people. So the primary principle, people first before politics. And in our times when it has become too complex to understand, too complex even to hope that it will be better, we have to go back to our history, to who we were before we knew and adapted these borrowed structures. So again, so that we can understand who we are in this complex world and our complex structures already in context right now, we have to go back to the time when all these borrowed structures were as simple as it should be. Because by knowing how we were as a people, how we live our lives before all these complexities, all these complications, maybe, just maybe, with all the hope we can pray for, we can understand ourselves and why we behave the way we do. So take out the scaffolding and see what's going on inside. So many of the points I discussed are pretty much obvious, actually. Glaringly obvious to all of you. But have you ever considered in all our educated, informed minds, thoughts and feelings that these have been both the culprit and the cure to the many social problems we have? That is, if we only know how to use them to help us. So, what I'm saying is, what we have, the social interactions and relationships we have in our tribal culture, what's left of it, what remains of it, is both the culprit and the cure. It's just how we use it. The politicians use it, actually. Now, how do we counteract it? Also with the same set of values, of belief systems, of traditions, how we use it. So I've explored tribal communities to its very core, that is the family, the basic unit of society. Family is the primary principle, and with whatever social and political organizations that develop from it, a principle is a principle. Again, family is the primary principle. So the primary principle is people first before politics. So that is the primary principle, family. And all the rest actually is a complication of family life. The developments we have in society, social organizations, and political organizations are simply added structures to this very simple core. We can never do away with it. Family. The secondary principle, politics create context, may in fact be the very doom of the primary principle if we don't keep in mind the primary principle is everything that we do. So take note, our current government right now is just a secondary principle. It was it's an instituted political organization from the primary one, which is family. I mean, in history, just cutting short that development. And right now, the very primary principle of this institution right now we have is being disturbed by the secondary principle politics, which is politics trade context. And that's an issue. And saying that, I say what I advocate as we try to explore what Filipino politics truly is, taking into consideration all the philosophies that we will be discussing in this conference. After a long journey back to our history, thousands of years back to how we lived our lives in the tribal communities for a long ago until now, how we live our lives today, still tribal in nature with a little icing of anything and everything in the contemporary world, just to find our context. Simple. Our context, our Filipino context, is simple. The context of our Filipino politics is family, the primary principle. Our leaders are our fathers and mothers. We as a people are brothers and sisters. We as Filipinos are one, thriving, dynamic, and I must say happy family. This is simply unique in our culture. And uh, being here in a diverse society, I could always say that we have when Filipinos have a concept of nation as a family, which is something unique in us. It's that's why it also helps me clarify my advocacies, my insights, because I have engaged also with other cultures, and I can see that, yeah, like their concept is that of nationhood is detached from family, because probably it has to do also with how society also enforces individualism. That's why it's so easy for them to agree on relative policies, you know, policies that are self-serving. So that is something unique in our culture that influences to follow Filipinos as a family. Other nations does not have that. They have countrymen, fellow men, but not family as a concept of a nation. And I don't want to lose that. I'm just hoping, as I advocate this, that no matter how difficult we hold on to what we believe is my right or how equality should be, there is always a sense of what family should be. So, and for us Filipinos, it's there in our minds and hearts. It's immaterial. And that's where cultural lag happens, because we are moved by a secondary principle of politics, creating a context that is detached from the primary context, the primary principle, which is family. So there's a problem there. Now, as we explore further with all the philosophies that we can think of, I hope that these philosophies that we're trying to bring together also leads towards that principle, the primary principle of family. To save the family, to save that institution we have, which is the basic ones, is our only hope as a nation. I don't know. So, with this exploration, I hope that I have helped inform your minds and hearts and souls to that there is something good in what we have as Filipinos, especially when we look back to how we were as a people, how we hold on to our principles, how we hold on to our traditions, to our customs, to our belief systems, our values, our social values are very strong because they are always in reference to the other. And this other, of course, builds up that basic unit, that core in society, which is family. I cannot imagine a world that has played around with a concept about family. What happens definitely is you'll be before family is individual, and it's it's unimaginable for a world to just exist as an individual, because we have it all. We should always have this experience already of family. It's okay probably if we haven't instituted ourselves that phenomenon of family, but we have already. And developments that we have now are all rooted towards that relationship and interaction, which is family. So thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to share with you my thoughts on uh, philosophy and politics, and of course putting politics into context. Uh, Again, this is my sanity, so thank you very much for bearing with me, especially that I've exceeded almost about 10 minutes of my time. Hopefully, Cordero did not cut portions of it so that I can be accommodated for the 30 minutes window. And, well, hoping for next time. Uh, it's always, it's always my moving force to be able to share my thoughts to my family. I mean, as a teacher, I always look forward to go back there and teach, to empower more minds, Filipino minds. I don't want to empower Canadian minds anymore. Just Filipino minds. So that's my personal bias. So thank you very much for giving me this opportunity again, and hope you've learned something from my sharing. Thank you.